Yes, hello, and welcome back once again to The Dark. And here we are, Scott in the Dark. My name is Scott Swenson. I am the host of this periodic podcast for folks in the haunted attraction industry. And I'm not used to the shorter intro, so I wasn't quite ready. But I'm ready now, so that's good. That's good. Today we're going to talk about something that was actually suggested in one of our, or on one of my Facebook groups, and I should say our because it really is a group that I think everybody who listens and belongs to the group actually contributes to more than even I do. But it's on Facebook, and if you're not a member, please find it on Facebook, join it. It's a great community of people who are sharing really cool ideas and thoughts and challenges and questions and whatever. But one of the comments came up on the Facebook group, have I ever done a fully dark haunted house or a dark house experience? And the truth is, no, I have never actually done a full dark haunted attraction. I've done dark areas or dark sections of haunts, but I really haven't explored or experienced, well, I've experienced them, I've been to them, but I haven't really explored doing them. And I think most of that is because so many of my clients are either theme parks or zoos, and they're so concerned about safety that the moment you say dark attraction, they think, oh, well, no, we can't put our guests in the dark forever, or because they'll trip over something or there'll be some lawsuit. And we'll talk about safety in a moment. But again, this is another one of those topics that I don't pretend to be an expert on, but I will share with you some of my thoughts, some of my observations from what I've seen other people do, and hopefully it will spark, again, some interest. I've always said I don't have all the answers. I may have some of the right questions, but I don't always have all the right answers, and I always have an opinion. So hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit about that. I'm also trying something a little bit new. You know, as if you've listened or seen any of the episodes from 2021, not only am I recording, I'm also videotaping. So it's not just a podcast, you can also watch it on my YouTube channel. And I've done that because, again, feedback from people who listen or pay attention to the show have said, you know, Scott, sometimes I just want to watch you talk, and sometimes I want to listen. So now you've got both options. Quite honestly, I don't know who would want to watch, because there's really nothing happening other than me sitting in front of a background talking. But hey, if you want to see my face, there it is. And if you're just listening, there it's not, because flip over to YouTube and you'll see it. And anyway, so like I said, we're going to talk about dark houses. And first of all, thank you very much for making this suggestion. I'm excited to talk about it. It's something I would love to do. So if anybody who's out there is looking to do a fully dark haunt and they need a consultant, I'm here. You can find me. And if you decide I don't need a consultant because you just shared all your thoughts and ideas on this show, great, more power to you. I love that. So here are just a few of my thoughts and ideas. And for those of you who are watching the video, you're going to see me looking down because I do have cheat sheet. I do have a cheat sheet. I know it doesn't sound like it, but I do actually plan these out. I do actually plan my podcasts out. I have a little outline and yeah, I know, hard to believe, isn't it? But anyway, I do. So here are my notes. So let's talk a little bit about thoughts and ideas. Why would you consider doing a dark haunt? Well, there's a couple of reasons. You know, darkness is scary to a lot of people. And it's, you know, just like everything else, it's not scary to everyone because there's not a single thing that is scary to everyone. But the thing about darkness is it's something that goes back to probably one of our earliest childhood fears, those people who still find it scary. It's also one of those few times where you actually separate from the rest of the world. When you can't see what's going on around you, you often wonder, you know, gosh, what's lurking in the darkness? What is it I don't see? I think it also, so I think there's something very primal about it for a lot of people, those people who are afraid of it. I also think it means that you're unable to prepare for what's going to happen next. I think it's kind of why roller coasters are fun for people, because you don't know where that next twist or turn is going to come. You can't always prepare. The same is true in a dark haunt. And finally, there are those people who love them, and there are people who absolutely hate them and think they're lame and a waste of time. And I'm going to sound like I'm being, kind of shady, that I'm like being a little, I don't know, judgmental here. But I think the people who enjoy dark haunts, in other words, haunts that, you walk through primarily in the dark and have the experience take place around you, I think those people actually have, the people who enjoy them actually have greater imaginations. I think they're more able to buy into the stimuli that is being presented, and create things that are far more intense in their own minds than they ever would have had you tried to spend the money on scenic to create it. It's very Alfred Hitchcock, actually. Hitchcock was always about, what don't you see? What can I make you think is going on just out of frame? I think the thing most people think about when they think of Hitchcock and what you don't see is the shower scene. You don't see this big, bloody, massive shower scene. You see quick cuts, and then you see chocolate syrup running down a drain. Yes, that's what it really was. I know a lot of you know that, but you see the blood, at the end. Even in theme park haunted attractions, I always used to say, I want to show you just before or just after the moment of terror. I want to show just before the knife goes into the screaming victim's chest, or just after it's happened and they're bleeding out and begging for mercy. It's that the moment itself is not necessarily the terrifying part for me. It's the buildup and it's the aftermath. So with that in mind, I think that dark haunted attractions kind of play up on all of that. And something that I didn't put in my notes, but I've just been thinking about, is the other nice thing about dark haunts is if you do have guests who are visually impaired. Blind guests can enjoy these kinds of experiences as much or more than sighted guests. So this may also be an opportunity for you to open up to guests with different needs, and maybe even bring somebody who is visually impaired on as a consultant. I think the reason I thought of this is one of my clients happens to be the Lion's Eye Institute. The Lion's Eye Institute, and I work with them to help them produce their eyeball, which is their huge fundraiser each year. And working with people who are visually impaired, it's amazing how they are able to perceive the world in a very rich way. And as someone who wears glasses, someone who, I'm not blind by any stretch of the imagination, I can see without my glasses. I can't read, but I can see. But and especially considering what I do for a living, I am reliant on my sight for so many things. And this may be an opportunity to sort of explore doing a dark haunted house that may open it up for, clients who don't have vision. So again, it's a side thought, but you know how these things kind of come into my brain as I'm talking, and then probably should just stay there, but usually they just come out of my mouth. So that's some of the thoughts and ideas as to why you'd want to do a dark house. It is unique. And there are those people who will say, if you do a dark house, it's cheaper than doing a fully blown visual walk-through theatrical haunt. And the more I started to write notes, the more I wondered if that was indeed true, because there's a lot of things you have to take into consideration when you're doing a dark haunt. There are things you can't rely on, and there are other things that you have to ramp up in order to make them great stories or great moments or there has to be some sort of excitement. Granted, you do have less treated scenic. There's no question about that. And for some people, there are those haunters that are like, I don't really care about the story, I don't really care about the actors, I don't really care about anything but the big animations. Well, you don't really have those in a dark haunt. You can, I'm sure you can adapt them to use them as lighting moments, which we'll talk about in just a second here as well. But you don't have the let me age this scenic down. You don't have those moments of, gosh, we have to create the front of a cathedral wall because nobody's going to see it. So yes, you will save some money on scenic, but you still have to have some, because even in the dark, you have to or at least I would, if I were going to do a dark haunt, I would say we have to focus on things like different textures, so that, because guests, as they're walking through a dark haunt, have their hands out and they're reaching for things to help guide them and move them along. And if they're always touching, visqueen or some sort of plywood, black painted plywood, then it loses interest. There needs to be something that your fingers brush up against. The one I always like to use is when I do dark sections is to take old artificial Christmas trees, and put them on the wall, because they're prickly enough that they feel weird. And if you're doing something that's like you're in the woods outdoors, it makes total sense. And you add a pine scent to it, and you're walking through a dark forest. So, but I think that's important, that you don't think, well, I won't need any sort of scenic. Obviously, you're still going to need walls. You're still going to need some way to guide people through. These walls may move. These walls may slide and move, which would, in the dark, just be disorienting as heck. And I'll give you a really good example of that in just a second too. But you're going to have to change the textures of the walls so that they all feel different and create some sort of sensual, tactile. That's the word I'm looking for, tactile variety. Because if I say sensual variety, people get completely the wrong idea. So the other thing to keep in mind too is changing the surfaces of the floor. Now, I say to do this even in a haunt that is not a dark haunt. Add carpeting, add great work underneath your feet, because when you walk onto something different, it changes the way you walk, which then changes the way you perceive the room. This is even more true if you're doing a dark haunt. Also recognize that because you're dealing with a physical environment, you're going to have to find ways to make physical contact with the guests. Now, obviously, some of the same things apply, like air cannons and feather ticklers and that sort of thing. But they have a whole new way of working in a dark haunt. Air cannons need to be triggered with some sort of audio. Normally we'll trigger, like if you want to do a gunshot, you'll trigger an audio lighting thing with a gun. The problem is now you just won't be able to see the gun. So you'll have to make sure that guests understand what it is that's making this blast of air that's hitting them in the side or the face or the leg or whatever. I try to avoid hitting people in the face with an air cannon because a lot of people wear contacts, and in any haunt, it's hard to find a contact lens that gets blown out of somebody's eye. But in a dark haunt, it's even worse. So, but you have to make sure that it makes sense as to why they're being touched. Or if, say for example, you're walking through something, you get hit with an air blast, then you have to explain what it was somehow afterwards. Otherwise, it's just, I'm being pelted with air, which I suppose would be scary for some folks, but I don't think it's terribly repeatable, in my opinion. We talked about moving walls earlier. One of the dark haunts that I went to many years ago was at Netherworld, and they had a dark haunt in there. I think it's either their old location. They had a dark haunt downstairs, and then they had their main haunt upstairs. And I was with my dear departed friend Robbie Lepre, who you've all heard me talk about, or heard me write about at least. And she was in this dark haunt with me, and we got separated because there were moving walls, and the actors recognized that Robbie made a lot of noise when she got scared. She would scream and laugh. And as we all know with any haunt actor, anyone who screams and laughs becomes then their prime target. And it's sort of like reaching for the applause over and over and over again in their performance. So what they ended up doing is, with the moving wall system that they actually had her trapped in the haunt, and she could not find her way out. So I'm outside, and they had to keep her trapped in there for I'd say another good 7 to 10 minutes. And I can hear her screaming, and I'm out there with some of the other folks that we were with, and we we just started laughing. We just started laughing so hard because we were like, oh gosh, Robbie's trapped. They're never going to let her go because they're having way too much fun with her. And so those moving walls, and they can, you know, when I say moving walls, they can be anything from sliding walls to pivoting walls like doors. But you just have to make sure that when they move quietly, so that guests don't hear them move into place. Unless, of course, you're doing something that's like chain link, and then you want it to sound like you're being trapped in certain areas. But for the most part, in this particular haunt, they were very quiet, and they would just sort of close. I believe, I don't know for a fact, but I believe they were actually giant doors that would just hinge to redirect you in a different way, close off one pathway, put you in a dead end for a while, and then force you to turn around and come back out. So even though you can't see the scenic, you do have to have some sort of scenic structure to not only guide the guests through, but also provide them with tactile variation throughout the course of the experience. Obviously, audio is a huge deal. You have to use the audio to kind of tell the story. You have to use it to paint the picture of where you are. Again, also important in let's call them sighted haunts for lack of a better description. But in standard haunted attractions, yes, you know me, I love audio, and I want to do some sort of really cool sort of bed of audio, and then I also like point source audio. But this is absolutely essential in dark haunts. Now, I know some people may say, well, I want my haunt to be completely silent. Okay, here's my suggestion for that. Follow a cinematic trick, and that is to create room tone. Room tone in films and video is when they shoot something, they'll have everybody on set just be completely quiet, and they'll record what they call room tone, which is just the sound of the room. I know that sounds like a waste of time. However, what it does is it gives the audio editors in the film the opportunity to not have those weird sort of audio jump cuts. If you ever watch student films, you'll hear in the audio, somebody will be talking, and then they'll turn to the other person, and there'll be this, so Jim, what do you think? And it sounds completely different. They use room tone to blend over that edit from one take to the next. In haunted attractions, having some sort of white noise, room tone, whatever, creates the sense of silence, creates almost an artificial silence. Like, for example, if you want something to appear completely silent, play white noise, play a very low-level white noise on your audio speakers. Because what that does is it masks out any other sound that might be coming in from outside or from other guests, and it makes it seem quieter. I know that seems weird and counterintuitive, but trust me, it works. Play with it. You could, like I said, and you can also use it to paint pictures. You know, play that game of what's making this sound. And, you know, say, for example, you're doing a serial killer, you know, a serial killer dark house, and you just every now and then have the sound of metal scraping on concrete. Is that a knife? Is that a shovel? Is that an axe? And, you know, and if you can get it to move in stereo from one speaker to the next, it's even more effective and even more disorienting. And you can also use audio for startle scares. You know, I like to use audio triggers a lot, but in a haunt, you know, once you've set up that something is going to happen, like you hear, you know, say for example, in the distance you hear a flock of bats, and then you hear them get louder and louder and louder, and then you've got an air effect, a triggered air effect as they go by, and then they go off into the darkness. It gives you a great opportunity to use audio to create those startle moments. And yes, you can always use, you know, a car horn or a gunshot or a scream or a bang or whatever to do those startle scares as well. And those can either be triggered by proximity or by actor foot switches, or just randomly go off throughout the course of your haunt. So obviously, audio is a huge deal when it comes to a haunt that is dark. Then I wrote down lighting. Now I know some of you are thinking, wait a minute, it's a dark haunt. Why are you talking about lighting? Well, there's a couple things you have to remember with with darkness, and the human eye. Your eye will adjust to dark settings, and it is highly unlikely that you will be able to replicate 100% total darkness. So lighting is going to be essential to keep guests from having their eyes completely adjust to being in the dark. So here's a couple of suggestions. One of the things that we used to do in theme park to create what we would call synthetic darkness was to make one room really bright, or have a really bright strobe right in the eyes of the guests, so that their eyes would adjust to the brightness, and then when they get into the next room, it would be a very, very low light level, but the guests would swear it was total darkness. It really wasn't. There was still light in there, and the longer they spent in there, the more they could actually see. So if you're going to do a dark haunt, before you send them in, make sure that your cue is really bright and garish, so that their eyes adjust to being in bright, bright light. Or throughout the course of the haunted attraction, have moments where, excuse me, where there are lit scenes that are really bright in your eyes, long period of, not a long period of time, short period of time. You can do it with flashes, because the moment you get that flash, then all of a sudden the darkness becomes darker. The other thing that you can use, that I've seen done very, very well, is to use lighting in very small, like glowing moments that will help guide guests to the next space. It does, again, make their eyes readjust, but it also serves a very practical operational purpose, and that is to give people sort of little signposts to keep moving forward. And then, of course, you round the next corner, and they're back in quote-unquote total darkness again. So don't completely ignore lighting, even though you're focusing on the dark. Because, I mean, lighting design in general is not just about the light you put in there, it's about the light you don't put in there. So shadow or negative space is just as important to a lighting design as the space that you actually light. So what you don't light is just as important as what you do. And you have to make those very intelligent choices so that A, you have variety, and B, your guests' eyes don't adjust to being in total darkness for the entire duration of your haunt. So what about actors? Here's what this is just opinion. This is not based on experience. This is based on kind of a hunch, I guess. So I have been told, and I would most likely agree with it, even based on the haunted experiences that I've had. Actors' eyes adjust to the lighting that they're in for long periods of time. And I've talked to several people who run dark haunts, or several actors who've worked in dark areas of haunts, and they say they don't really need a whole lot of help after they've been in there for a little while. They actually have the ability to see in whatever extremely low light level there is in there, which appears to be total darkness to the guests. But one of them actually shared with me a trick, and I love it because it's based in history. Pirates are known for wearing a patch over one eye, and we all like to think it's because that eye's been gouged out in a sword fight or whatever. The truth of the matter is, many pirates, many sailors in general, would wear a patch over one eye because when they went down below deck, it was dark. There was no electric lighting in the old sailing ships. So what they would do is they would keep one eye in darkness, and then when they went below deck, they'd flip the patch to the other eye, and they could see in the dark. They wouldn't have to wait for their eyes to adjust from being in the bright sunlight when they're on deck to being in the total darkness when they're below deck. So I have actually known haunt actors who will do the same thing. They will keep one eye covered or closed while they're in a back area, and then they'll be able to immediately use that eye once they get back to the dark space and do their jobs really well. You can get night vision goggles. They're not cheap. And maybe if you've got a space that is truly, truly, truly dark, like if you're haunting in a cave deep underground that has zero light, you may need them. You may need some sort of night vision goggle for your actor. And that's certainly a possibility. It gives them the ability to see quite well. The other thing with haunt actors that I think is going to be essential in a dark haunt is their ability to improvise. They're going to need to be able to follow where the guest is going, both physically and psychologically. What is going on in the guest's mind? Do they feel trapped? When are they going to need to keep them, corralled in one area, and when are they going to need help them move on? And how do they do that? What kind of tools do they use? We talked about feather ticklers or ways to make physical contact and moving walls, that sort of thing. But even whispering, it's time to move on, or I'm right behind you. That kind of stuff is going to be things that are going to need to be a strong part of the actor's toolbox, I would think, in a dark haunt. So now let's talk a little bit about, I mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, but now let's talk a little bit about safety. So I'm going to guess that dark haunts are not nearly as quote unquote unsafe as the perception, because very few guests are going to run full tilt in total darkness. I don't anticipate that happening. I'm sure there are stories out there that are crazy and I would think would be anomalies, but again, I'm guessing. So as long as guests can find a wall, I would assume that they would. The most terrifying thing for me would be to be in the middle of a giant ballroom and not be able to find a wall. I would actually probably get vertigo and fall down. I'd probably get dizzy in total darkness and fall down. But, I'm old and crazy. One of my favorite beginnings, actually, to a dark haunt was you were told, here, follow this rope, and whatever you do, don't let go of it. And you'd follow the rope, and it would, go up the wall and down the wall, and after you'd wound around several corners and were completely in total darkness, the rope would end, and you'd hear a door shut behind you. And you were like, oh, crap. Okay, so I'm in it now. But I think that was used not only as a storytelling device, but also as a safety device, because it got you fully into the haunt without slowing down the entrance. If people are hesitant, they slow down. And we always used to say with theme park haunts, people always walk towards the light. They always walk towards the light. And when there's no light, they stop. So I think that's what that's for, is to get people into the haunt so you can keep the guest flow moving forward. I would also think you'd have to look out very carefully for trip hazards. Make certain that there aren't any, because people are going to be either walking with their hands out in front of them or walking with them along the walls, and they're not going to be able to see things they can trip over. That doesn't mean that you can't make the pathway get wider and get more narrow. That's fine, but just don't do it with things below the knees to make them fall down. So now, unfortunately, okay, so let me just say, this is being recorded at the end of January in 2021, and I can't talk about safety without talking about pandemic or COVID or that sort of thing. In a dark haunt, since everything is going to be touched, you're really going to have to take COVID safety very, very intelligently and either try to find a way to clean off all surfaces between each guest grouping. I don't know. But it's certainly a question that you have to ask yourself, is if guests are going through touching all handrails at all times, aren't you going to want to go through and clean them? I mean, even when we did, last season, when we did Undead in the Water, we had 3 different teams of performers, of actors, scare actors, who had cleaning equipment with them and were cleaning down railings and regularly touched surfaces. So in a dark haunt where they're touched by everyone, I would think that would certainly be something you'd want to take into consideration. I don't know what the answer is. But it's certainly, I would feel irresponsible if I didn't at least mention it as something that should be taken into consideration. And is it going to be cost effective to clean down the entire haunt between each set of guests? Quite honestly, probably not. Is there a way to get guests to hand sanitize, every guest to wash their hands and hand sanitize before walking in? Possibly. Is that going to be necessary forever? Who knows? So, again, I'm not even making a suggestion on that. I just want to make sure that you guys think about it if you do decide to do a dark haunt in COVID. And if you are doing a dark haunt during COVID, go on the Facebook group and share your thoughts and ideas there, because I do read them, and it will also be a great way to contact with or to connect with a huge number of listeners of this show. So yeah, let me know how you're handling that, because I don't have an answer. I just have a good question. The thing we can't forget is, even in a dark haunt, you've got to have a story. You've still got to have a beginning, a middle, and end. You have to have rising action, some sort of climax. It still needs to have that story arc. And the difference is, you can't show the story. You have to tell the story or immerse the story. And that doesn't mean that you have a narrator through the whole thing necessarily, although that is an option. You know, if you did a Lost in the Dark fairy tale woods, and you had a narrator who did a fairy tale through the whole thing, and then you just had flashes of the big bad wolf coming at you, you know, and a flash of light, your eyes dilate, or your pupils constrict again, or dilate, whatever they do, they constrict, and then you're back in the darkness. That may be a total way of doing it, is with a narrator, but you still have to have some sort of story. You can't just be, I'm going to walk in the dark for 10 minutes or 15 minutes or 20 minutes, because that loses its thrill very quickly. And you can't tell the story visually. So you just have to flip that switch in your brain going, okay, if my eyes are closed, how am I getting the story? And I've seen it done a bunch of different ways. I have actually been through one that did have a narrator. I've been through one that the glowing moments were like Egyptian cartouches, and they would share with you a little bit more of the story, and then you'd move on. I've had situations where you have to take hold of things, you know, like I said about the beginning, where you start with the rope, and then I've been to a couple where there's another 2 or 3 of those stations throughout the course of the experience where you grab onto something and go through for a while. But you still need to tell a story. I think that's really, really important, is that you have to recognize storytelling is still part of what haunted attractions are. Otherwise, you're just walking in the dark, and guests aren't going to pay you, you know, what you need in order to make money to just walk in a dark warehouse. So don't necessarily just think about it as, oh, here's a cheap thing we can do. We'll just put guests in the dark and charge them for it. I don't think that's going to work, or at least not for more than 1 year. Just saying. So the interesting thing is, when I put together this particular show, I got to realizing that a dark haunt and a standard haunt are pretty much the same thing, just using different tools. In my notes, I put so similar and yet so very different. So I think that if for nothing else, if for no other reason, I would really like to do a dark haunt, because I think it'd be interesting to see if it improved how I thought about sighted haunts or standard haunts. If it improved my ability to tweak audio, or to reduce lighting in certain areas so that we were still able to tell the story and still able to see things, but created those moments of darkness, or those moments of shadow, or those moments of pause. I don't really know. But I think it's interesting that on the surface it appears as though it'd be something completely different, but I'm not sure that it is, because we're still trying to accomplish the same thing, and that is to take our guests on a terrifying journey that they want to tell their friends about, and they want to come back and experience again. So those are my thoughts on dark haunts. Hopefully that was worth the suggestion from the Facebook group. In my last few moments here, where I always talk, you know, I call it my arrogant moments, where I talk about me and what I'm doing and blah, blah, blah. I'm going to be very, very brief. Can you believe it? Me being very brief. I'm going to share something that I am so incredibly proud of, and I'm sharing this with you, and I'm sharing it on behalf of the book's editor and publisher, Philip Hernandez. But we got this glorious review for the new book on Amazon, and I just want to read it to you. It says, nothing else on the market even comes close. This book will become the new Bible for haunted attraction design. Scott Swenson has taken his many years designing haunted attractions for theme parks and has packed them into one book, a successful career's worth of knowledge in 193 pages, and all for under $15. This is a review, of course, of the brand new book, The 13 Commandments of Haunting. And I thank you so very much for this review. There are several other reviews that have been very positive as well. And I'm glad people are enjoying it. I am very humbled by the fact that people are able to take what I share and find it useful. So if you've read the book, thank you very much. If you haven't and would like to, it is available on Amazon. I can't tell you how thrilled I am that, you know, this is the second book that I've put out. This is the one that I think actually has, it has more gravitas, it has more meat, and I also like it because I did actually do the painting on the cover. So the other one, the incredible Doug Schaefer did the cover for, but I actually got to do my own cover on this one. So I don't know. I'm very proud of it, and I don't want to sound overly arrogant because I don't know whether I deserve that arrogance, but I am very proud that people are enjoying it. So if you would like to find out more, go to Amazon, search The 13 Commandments of Haunting, or if you'd like to find out about anything else that I do, everything else that I do, join my newsletter, because I just redid my website, and I will be, the February issue of the newsletter, which comes out, by the way, on the 13th of every month. What a shocker. I'm redoing the format of that as well. And since things are changing so much, I'm going to spend less and less time in the show talking about what's coming up and more time focused in the newsletter about what I'm doing in the near future. So please go to scottswenson.com and click on the link that says subscribe to the newsletter. All I take is your name, your email address, your first name. You don't even have to give me your whole name, or make up a name. I don't care. Just something that I can call you when I want to, reference you specifically. So your first name, your email, the country that you are in, so that I can know where my listeners are, where my listeners at, and what else? I think that's it. Anyway, simple information, and then once a month, no more than once a month, I will send out an email newsletter to you with where I'm going to be, what projects I'm working on. And then every single newsletter has members-only content. Sometimes that's a video, sometimes it's something that you can download, sometimes it's something you can print at home. But I promise you that each and every month you'll get something that only members of the newsletter will have access to. Now, if they share it, that's up to y'all. But they won't get it from me. Let's put it that way. That, I guess, is the most recent episode of A Scott in the Dark. My name is Scott Swenson. Thank you so much for listening or watching, and hopefully I will talk to you again very soon. Until next time, rest in peace.